Okay, so this video really just plays off of what we did in the previous video, and we're just going to add a forgot password and forgot username link here. So first things first, let's add that button to the login menu. So go to public and then apps or app, views, pages, users, and then login.html. And so what we'll do is we'll create those two buttons next to the social media login buttons. So what we can do is just copy this last one here, the Google one. Now what I'll do is I'm going to actually include, it's going to be a link, so okay, and the first one will be forgot password. The second one will be forgot username. Same thing, include it in a link. And right now, let's make the forgot password, we'll say reset password. And then for username, we'll say reset username. Okay. And I'm going to change this up a bit. Instead of info, I'm going to make it danger and primary, just so they're unique. We're not going to need the ng clicks. There we go. And then actually what I'll do is I'm going to enclose these in a div. And then I'm going to add a class to it. Say reset. And then I'm going to go into the style sheet that's attached to this page. Inside the, so it's public app, assets, CSS, and then style.css. And then I will just add some styling to that. I'll say reset position, whoops, meant to say float, right. Okay. Then hit save on that and hit refresh and make sure you got the two buttons over here. Okay, then let's start off with, let's do the username first. So this is the route that we created, so I'm just going to copy that for a sec. And let's go into our routes folder and create that route. So we'll just go down to the very bottom, and I'm going to paste that in there now just as a reference. I'll say when/reset. Matter of fact, I'll just copy and paste it. Make sure it's correct. Template URL will be app, views, pages, users, and let's create a new folder just to kind of keep this all organized, and we'll name it, we'll say reset. And then inside of reset, we'll have, we'll say username.html, and then we'll create one called password.html. Okay, so back in the routes folder, let's go ahead and finish this up. So it's user/reset/username.html. Oops. And then for the controller, we'll create a new one. We'll say reset. We'll say actually username controller as be username. Okay. And we can delete this part here. And so I'm just going to copy the name of this controller because I'm going to create it now. So what we'll want to do is go inside of our controllers and open up the email controller, go down to the very bottom and create a new one. Okay, and we'll just paste that name in there. Okay, and let's go ahead and grab the code from the login page, the login.html, and use that same one for the username page. We'll just paste that. but get rid of everything with the exception of we'll just delete the Facebook and Twitter and all that stuff. Get rid of this activation link, not going to need that. And then we don't need all the inputs, we just need the username. Oops. All the way up to here. There you go. So basically what we have here is we have the, whoops, we don't need the password input either. We have the username field and a submit button. I'll just change to say submit. Then we have an error message and a success message. Okay. And then our loading icon. And so what we'll do is we'll change all these mains to username. And that is because that's what we named it in the routes here. We said controller as username. Okay. So we'll just change this to forgot username. And one other thing too, let's make sure we add authenticated as false. We don't want people to be able to access this view if they are already logged in. Okay, now let's see if this works. Let's go ahead and hit refresh and then try to access the forgot username link, and there you go. Okay, so now what we want to do is we want to grab whatever username the user enters here, and then we want to get it from the database and send that username to their email. Okay. And then actually, my mistake, we actually want to change this to email. Obviously, they're not going to be able to enter their username if they don't know it. So let's go back and change that really quick. Just go over to the username.html. We'll change this to forgot email. Or I mean, it's still forgot username, but this is going to be email. And then make sure you change that right here for name. And then as well for the login data, we'll change this to email. So now what we need to do is go ahead and create that route. So go into your backend side, app, routes, API. Okay, and then let's create a new endpoint here at the very bottom, below or right before the middleware. Okay, so we'll say router dot, get, and we'll say reset username, request response. Okay, and we'll be using the email to find the user. So we'll say email request.body. We'll say request params.email. And since we're doing the params, we'll pass that email in the URL here. So we'll say /email like that. And then we'll say execute function. That will either give us an error or the user. Of course, if error, throw error. And actually what I'll do is, I'm not going to throw the error, instead I'll say respond with JSON. Say false message error. Else, then we're going to check to see if the username is there. So we'll say if username is not true, res with JSON, and we'll say false message email was not found. Right, and then we'll do else. Okay, so here's what we're doing here, right? Where the user provides an email, and then we search the database for that email. If we find it, then we respond with a success, and we send them the username that they're requesting in the email. Otherwise, it's not found, and of course we tell them it wasn't found. And then this error is usually if we can't connect or something else is wrong. But usually you're going to either get email wasn't found or it was, and then we send them the email. So for the email template, we can just use the same one up here that we used in the previous route. Okay, so I'm just going to copy this and paste it right here. So our subject for the email will be, we'll say localhost username request. We'll say, let's see, you recently requested your username. Please save it in your files. And we'll say plus user.username. Okay, and then I'll just copy this and use it right here. Okay, and this is almost good to go. The last thing we want to do is up here in the select box, we're going to specify all the things that we used. So email, name, username, and I think that's everything that we used. Okay, so let's go ahead and create the service now. So go into your services folder inside of user service, and we're going to create a new one. We'll say user factory dot send username. We'll name it. And actually, one thing I want to do, I want to copy that route, make sure that I use it exactly as it's written. So we'll say return http.get API / then I will copy it, paste it there, and then we'll say plus we'll say user data. That's what we'll name our object here. Okay, and then we can delete that. Okay, and that will look like this: user.send username followed by user data. Okay, so because we did that, we have to go back to the form and replace all the ng models, right? So the ng model right now is login data, but we're actually using user data. So let's go ahead and replace that really quick. Okay, then now we can go into the controller and we can start to use that custom function we created there, right? So we'll create, first let's invoke that, and then we'll say app.sendUsername. We'll name it the same thing. Okay, and so, whoops, this is the function that will get called when the users click on the submit button. Okay, so let's go ahead and change that really quick in the form. Right here where it says ng submit, we'll change this from do login to send username. Okay, so let's go back to the controller, and then we can copy this, paste it there. Okay, so we'll pass in user data here, and then we just change this one to app.userdata. Okay, so what we'll do is we'll say then function data, and for right now we'll log it to the console. Okay, so basically what we're doing here is the user presses the button, and this is that button, this is that function, and it sends the data from the form, the username, and then we send it to the API, and that endpoint returns the data from the database, which is their username, email, whatever we need. Okay, in this case we just need the username. Okay, and then so since we're using the user object, let's go ahead and pass that into the function here. And then also, since we're not sending, we don't need to send the entire data. There's really only one. There's the email, but we just want to specify that here so that when it gets to the endpoint, it's not getting the entire object. It's just getting the email because that's all it needs. And if you'll see that in the API right here. We just need the email. We don't need the entire data. Okay. So go ahead and hit save on that, and then hit refresh on your page and enter your username, or your email address. Now, if it works, first of all, make sure this email is registered in your database, otherwise this won't work. But once that's done, go ahead and hit submit, and then it just log the data to the console. So let's check it, and it says message username has been sent to email, success true. Well, let's verify that, and then you'll see right here my email. Here's the email that we generated with the username. So that's how you send the user and their username if they forgot. Now also make sure to test this for wrong information. So enter an invalid email and then check out the new object and make sure it's success failed, and you'll see right here email was not found. Okay. And then also make sure you enter no data here and then hit submit and see what you get. Okay. Okay, and the reason we're getting that is because we didn't specify if nothing is sent in the request. So it's jumping to another route. So we can do that really quick. It's not very difficult to do. What we can do is we can say, we can add an if statement here that says if request.params email is not true, then res with JSON success false message no email was provided. Okay. And then else will do everything else. So I think right here. Okay. Okay, and so let's go back to the controller and configure our success and error messages. So first, the one thing that we need to do is we want to make sure that the user sends all the required information. So we'll just add to this input, we'll add required, and then we'll add no validate here. And then after the user data, we'll say comma. We'll say, well, one, we need to add a name to this form. So we'll say name is user form. So then right here, we'll say user form dot valid. Okay. And so in the controller, we won't execute this unless it is valid. So we'll say user data slash valid, and then only do this portion if it is valid. So we'll say if valid is true, then do this. Else, we'll respond with an error message that says, please enter a valid email. Okay. And then make sure to clear this every time the button is pressed. All right, so here we can go ahead and configure this. We'll say if data.data.success is true. Then we'll go ahead and give the user a success message. Okay. And then else, give them the error message. All right, so let's go ahead and test this out. And and the other thing too is I want to use the loading icon. We'll set that to true when the user presses the button, and we'll set it to false when data is retrieved. Right. So right here we'll say false, and then really actually you can just do that right here. Okay. And then also disable the form. So we'll say true. And then we'll set it to false if there's an error. Okay, so let's test this out. Go ahead and hit refresh. Go ahead and enter the correct email address there. Should get that success message, and then also the form should be disabled. Then go ahead and hit refresh and enter a wrong username, and it should not be disabled, and you should get that error message there, right? And then also make sure to test it with nothing entered into the field and just hit submit. Okay, and you get that error there. However, I forgot to stop the loading button there, so let me go ahead and do that really quick. So I'll put that down here. Okay, and that should fix that. Let me make sure. There we go. Okay. So let's go ahead and do the exact same thing with the password reset. So what we'll need to do is we can actually just grab this same form and use it for the password.html page. And this is basically where the user will request a link be sent to their email to reset the password. So we'll say forgot password. And actually, while we're at it, inside the reset folder, go ahead and create a new file. We'll name it new password.html, and this is where the user will go to enter in their new password. Okay. The only thing that we're going to need is the username, so we'll change this to username. Okay. And change this to username. Okay, and then let's go into our routes and add a new route for this. So remember, it's password.html, so go into your routes file and let's create a new one. Say /when. We'll say reset password. And we'll create a new one. We'll say password controller. Okay, and then we can take this and replace it in the form. So go ahead and find all the usernames and change that to password. Okay. So let's go ahead and create this password controller here. So go back into your email controller, and then we'll just create a new one right below the username one. And what I'll do is I'll just copy it because it's very similar. Then I'll just name it password controller. Okay. So let's go ahead and create our route, our endpoint inside the API file. So we'll do it right below this one. And so we'll say router dot put, and we'll say reset password. What am I thinking here? Okay, so we need a token to send to the user. So what we can do is we can go inside the user model and give them a new field that allows them to reset the password if it's set to true, right? So we'll say reset token. We'll do it all lowercase. We'll say reset token. It's going to be confusing, but type will be string, required false. Okay, and then going back to our API, we can go ahead and look for the user by that. So we'll say user.find1, and we'll use the user name. Okay. And then we'll pass in this. Gives us either an error or the user. So say if error, throw error. And if no user is found, then we'll say success false. And the message is username was not found. Else, we'll do else if actually, and we'll say user.active. Right, so what we're doing here is we're getting the username. The user gives us their username, okay, on the password.html page. And we take that and search the database for it. And then we check to see if the account is active. So it's up to you whether or not you want to give them, allow them to change their password if their account is active, or not, right? So for me, I don't want them to be able to change their password unless they've activated their account first, because that should come first. Now, I didn't implement that up here in getting the username name sent to their email. You can do that if you like. I kind of just skipped over it. Not really a big deal, but so you can say here, respond with JSON, success, false, message, account has not yet been activated. Okay. And then this will be our last else. And then what we do now is give the user a token. So I'm just going to use the one that we did up here when the user registers. So I'll just use that same one. Okay. Oops. Instead of temporary token, it'll be reset token, right? And then I'll save the user. I'll say user.save, and I'll check for errors. If error, then res.json, success false, message, whatever that error is. Okay, else, we'll go ahead in here and send the email, right? So, but first let me go ahead and initiate that response, which will be true message. We'll say, please check your email for password reset link. Okay, so let's go ahead and go to the top and copy this sample email, right? We'll just use the same one. Paste it here. And then for the subject, we'll say localhost reset password request. We'll say you recently requested a password reset link. Please click on the link below to reset your password. And so here we're gonna link them to the new page that we created, which if you go to reset, it was new password, right? So we'll name this new password. The new password. Instead of temporary token, it'll be reset token. Okay. So then this is almost good to go. Let's go ahead and copy this and use the plain text here. Oops. There we go. And then don't forget up here in the select, so we use the username, email, reset token, and the name. I believe that's all we used. Okay, so now we're ready to go ahead and implement this in the controller. So I am going to copy this, and actually before I do that, I want to go ahead and create this new route before I forget. So let's go back into our routes file and create the new one. So I'm just going to paste this down here at the bottom so I don't forget. Say .when/ template app views pages users new password. And then actually I want to change this. I'm just going to name it reset with a token next to it, right? So I'm going to go back to the API and just change this to reset, just something a little bit more practical. Okay. And where's the controller? And then so for the controller, for the reset page, we'll say password controller. Oh, did we already use that? Okay, yeah, I'll say reset controller. Controller as reset. Okay. And so let's go ahead and create that controller now. And oh, actually I forgot to say authenticated set to false. And I don't know why I keep forgetting to do that. But you want to make sure that this is set to false so people that are logged in cannot access this page. So we'll say the same thing here too. While I'm at it, let me just make sure. Yeah, there we go. Okay. So yeah, let's go ahead and create that controller now. We'll go back into the email controller, create it right below. Whoops, this is not actually what I meant to name it. I meant to say reset control. There we go. Just to keep it consistent with the other ones. Okay. So before we go on to the new page, the new password.html and the controller, let's go ahead and finish up here. So let's go into our user service and create the new one, right? So we'll say user factory and we'll say send password, or yeah, we'll say send password. Okay, and I'll return HTTP. Now I want to make sure it's correct, so let me go back. And here it is. Just paste that there for a sec. Say put /API/reset password. Okay, let me delete this. Whoops. There we go. And then, whoops, we'll say reset data. Reset data, and then pass that here as well. Okay, so that will look like this. User.send password with reset data. Okay, and just like before, because we did that, we have to go over to the password page and change all the user data to reset data. Whoops. Okay. So let's go back into our controller and we can use this now. So I'm just going to paste this right up here. So we'll name our function send password. So let me go ahead and change that in the page, the password page. We'll change the on submit. We'll do, oh, did I already change that? Okay, there we go, send password. And I don't know how this happened, but this is actually supposed to be username. So let me just change this really quick. Yeah, there we go. Say submit. Yep, this all looks good. So going back to our controller, we'll go ahead and use this down here instead. Just cut this out. And then I'm just going to fix this. And then user data is going to be reset data now. And then here I'll change this to app.resetData. And then we'll just change this to enter a valid username. Okay. So real quick before we go on from here, I realized I made a mistake in the API file. Make sure you also grab the active field from the database because we used it right here. Otherwise, it will always return true that the user does not have an active account. Additionally, I misspelled this word right here. It's actually EXEC. But once you fix those two, if you did make that same error, go ahead and hit save, and then, oops, that's my email. Go ahead and hit refresh, and then go ahead and hit that forgot password, enter the username, and hit submit. Okay, and you should see that success message along with the disabling of the form. Go ahead and check your email and make sure you get that. Okay. Of course, if you click it, you'll get the URL correctly, but it's blank because we didn't add anything yet. But also go back, hit refresh, and enter a just nothing there, just to make sure that we have both errors and success covered. So let's go ahead and populate the page to reset their password. So what we can do is we can go into the register page, because that one has our confirm password, and so and our validation already in place. So what we can do is we can just copy it and just use that same one. So go ahead and copy the entire thing, and then we'll just cut out the pieces we don't need. So we don't need name. Okay. Oops. Make sure I cut everything out that I was supposed to. We don't need email. We don't need username. And then we'll just keep password and then password confirm. Instead of register, we'll say reset password. Okay. And then the rest can stay the same. Instead of user registration, we'll just name it reset password. Okay, and then if you recall in the routes, we named the controller attached to this one as reset. So let's go ahead and change all the registers to reset. Okay. Okay, so now we need a way to, once the user clicks on the link there, once the page loads, we need a way to grab the user to see who is it that's resetting the password. So what we need to do is actually create another route, another endpoint, and we can just use the same one, except this time it will be a GET request, right? And we'll say reset password, just the same one. And then we'll pass the token here, okay? And that's what we'll get that from up here. And what we'll do is we'll find a user using the reset token, and that's the one we assigned up here. So we're looking for that token. Okay, so we're getting it from the parameters from the URL. Okay. Okay, so we'll say function, whoops, error or user, if error, throw error. So what we'll do is we'll create a variable, name it token, and we'll assign the token that the user has to that variable. And then we'll verify it, and we'll just use the same exact code down here. Let me make sure I grab the entire thing. Okay, there we go. Okay, and so we'll verify, and if it's not valid, we'll say password link has expired. And then we're not actually going to do this part down here at the bottom. Instead, we'll say res.json success true, and then return with the user. All right, so in summation, what we're doing here, in our first route, the user requests the link, okay? And they do so with their username, and then we send the link to that user. And the way we know the user is allowed to reset their password is if they have this token. Okay, and that's what we're doing here. We're checking for that token, which they can only get from their email. And then once we verify they have that token, then we return the user. In other words, we send this user to the controller so we can use it to then save the password. Okay. So let's go into our user services. Actually, let me copy this. And then let's create a new one. So we'll say user factory dot, we'll say reset user. I don't know know where I come up with those names, but try to keep it as relevant as possible. We'll say http.get reset password / token. And pass that in here. Oops, forgot. Also API. And delete this. So that will look like this. So let's go ahead and use that in our controller. So we'll go back and right here in the reset controller, as soon as the page loads, we'll go ahead and execute it. And remember that we can grab this token from the URL using route params. So this is what it looks like, route params.token. And whoops, you don't put .token there, but you do put it right here. So, and then we'll say then we'll just log it to the console for right now. Okay, and then also, since we're using the user object, just like before, we have to pass that into the controller. Okay, and then also forgot to paste this into function. There we go. So go ahead and hit save on that, and then hit refresh on your page, and you'll notice it logs the object that it retrieved using this token. If you go to it, you'll see success true, and then here's our user object, right? Has everything that we'll need from the user. So what we can do at this point is we need to configure this so that if the user isn't found, then don't display this reset password, right? Instead display an error. So what we can do is as the page loads, we'll use the disable variable to lock the form, right? So we'll say app.disable is true. Or we can say, actually let's do hide, okay? And then what we'll do is we'll hide it if it's true, right? Rather than disable it. So we'll say ng hide if reset.hide is true. So hit save on that and then hit refresh and see. So we hide it initially, right? And then we show it if the user has correct, if they're authorized to reset their password, right? So we'll set it to false if it's success here, right? So we'll say if data is success. Whoops, misspelled that. Then we'll set this to false. Then we can give them a success message, I guess. We can say please enter a new password. If not success, then we'll leave hide as false, and then for our error message we'll say well, actually we can just use the one from the API. And if you recall from the API, the only one we have set up is password link expired, so that's really all we'll need, and then the user object, right? Okay, so go ahead and hit refresh with that and make sure you get that message. See, if it's an authorized link, then you'll get the please enter a new password. And then I'm going to just change something here just to make it an invalid token. See, now the form isn't visible, and instead it says password link has expired. Okay, so you want to make sure that it works like that. So now what we need to do is create yet another route. Luckily this is our last one, and basically this route will handle the saving of the password once the user enters the correct data. Now, before we go on though, I want you to make sure that you still have that validation here from Angular and everything. You want to make sure that it requires the fields to match and everything. You want to make sure that's still working. And so before I forget, I want to make sure that I do this. Go back into the new password HTML page, and so you'll see here where it says reg data valid and confirmed, right? So this, if the form is valid, if these two inputs are valid, and then also if passwords match. So in the controller, you can specify those two, right? So we can say, in our new function that we create, right, we'll say, we'll name it save password. And so this password will take those three fields, right? So let's just copy that. Only you don't need this. We'll just say valid and then confirmed, right? So you only want to do this, the function of saving the password to the database if it's valid. So we'll say if valid and confirmed, then go ahead and save it, else return an error that says, we'll say app error message, please ensure form is filled out properly. Okay. And then I'll just set that to false here, and then disable to true here, and then back false here again. Okay, so let's go ahead and create that route. Go into your API file, and right below this one, we'll do a final endpoint here. So this one we'll say router.put, and we'll say save password. And then of course we'll find user using the username. Then we'll either get a user or an error. If error, throw error as usual. So what we'll do is we'll grab their password and assign it to the user that's in the database. So we'll say request.body.password. Okay. And then we'll set the reset token to false. And then we'll save the user. And then check for errors. We'll say if error, then respond with that error. Oops. Meant to put that in brackets. Password successful, or we'll say password has been reset. And so one additional thing I want to do is I want to make sure that the password has been successfully set. So what we can do is we can say if request.body.password is true, then go ahead and do that, else with JSON saying false, password not provided. Okay. And then actually I'll make this, I'll say if null or if request.body.password is empty, right? We don't want either of those to happen. So yeah, then we'll go ahead and paste this whole thing right here. Okay, now one last thing that I want to do is now that the user's password has been reset and it's been saved in a database, I want to send them an email saying, hey, you reset your password recently. So let's just grab this template up here and we'll just use the same one. We'll paste it here and we'll say subject password reset. And it says, and we'll say you recently, we'll just say this email is to notify you that your password was recently reset at localhost.com. Okay. So then lastly, up here in the select, make sure you don't miss any like I did last time. So the username, name, password, reset token. Make sure I didn't miss any. Okay, email. Okay, so go ahead and hit save on that, and then copy the route into your service, and then we'll create a new one just like we've been doing. So this one will say user factory.save password, and then we'll say return http.put/API save password. Okay, delete this. And then what did I name the data? Okay, reg data, I think is what it is. Let me make sure here. Okay, yeah, reg data. Okay, so going back to the service, we'll pass that in here. Say comma reg data, and then here as well. So that will look like this. Save password reg data. Copy that, and then use it in our controller. Okay, so right here where it says if valid and confirm, then we'll go ahead and run this function. Right, and we'll say, well, first let's make it app.regdata. We'll say then function data. Okay, and just like we've been doing, we'll say if data.data.success, then set the success message. Okay, and then of course else, we'll do our error message. Okay. And then let's also include our loading, set it to true, and then set it to false once we get a response here. Okay, and then don't forget to take this function and pass it in the controller. Make sure that when the user hits submit on this form here, they're calling that function. Okay. And then lastly, I want to add the option of disable. Okay, we've already done that. Forgot about that. All right, and before we move on, let's go back to the API. I realize I actually kind of messed up a little bit here. So this should be our success message right here. So let's actually cut this out and put this at the top here. Right, so this should be there. And then this should be at the bottom here. Okay. Let's go ahead and fix that. Okay, so then go back to the email controller. We have a few left things to do. Now, before we pass this to the API, we also have to get the username, which we already got up here. So we just need to take it out from this scope and pass it to this one, right? So the way we can do that is on success, we can go ahead and create a variable. We'll say scope.username, and we'll get the data.data.username, right? And then go ahead and pass scope up here. And actually, it's going to be data.data user object.username. Okay. So now what I want to do before we go on is let's confirm that we're properly getting the username. So just hit refresh, and if that token is still good, you should see your username displayed here in the console. So now we can take that and use it below in the in this function. So what we'll do is, before we get to this part, we take the reg data. So we'll say app.regdata.username is equal to scope.username. Right? That way, when we pass reg data, we're passing the password, but we're also passing the username as well. Okay, and then, whoops, forgot to add this there. Okay, let's test this out. Go ahead and hit save, and then go back to the page, hit refresh, and enter a valid password. Okay, and there we go. We have our success message. So let's go ahead and verify that. I'm going to go check my email. There we go. We get a this email to notify you your password has been recently reset. Now, one other thing that I want to do is I want to check for errors. So go ahead and hit refresh after you've activated, and you'll see now that you get this cannot read property of null, right? And the reason for that is because in our API, the one where we return the user, we're only doing that if the token is verified. Well, this token can still technically be it's still technically valid because it hasn't expired. It just doesn't belong to any user in a database. So we have to take this a little bit further, and we have to say if user is null, then respond with JSON saying success false, message password. We'll say password link has expired. And then else, then respond with the success. So now if you hit refresh on the page, you'll get the password link has expired. Okay. The other thing that I want to do is go ahead and log in, go to the login page and request a password reset, but then do it again. Okay. Because what I want to do is I want to make sure that the first link isn't valid anymore once you request that second one. So go ahead and hit the first one and make sure that it's not working. Okay, and then there you go, password link has expired. So you just want to verify that before you move on. The other thing you'll notice is if you go to a valid reset link and then you just hit reset on the form, the form becomes disabled, and then we get this loading screen. The reason for that is because I missed a few things in the controller. So going back to the email controller, one, you want to stop the loading once you've gotten the data, right? So right about, we'll say right here, set it to false. And then also right here, set it to false. Okay. So go ahead and hit save and then hit refresh and make sure the loading wheel is not stuck there. Okay. So next thing we do is get rid of this disabled, right? So we'll just grab, actually I'll bring this down. We'll grab this variable. We'll set it to false right here. And then also we'll take this, actually let's move this down. Let's only do that if we're confirmed. So we'll put it here instead. And then go ahead and hit refresh and try to hit submit, and you'll see that the form isn't locked anymore. The next thing is make sure let's say you have passwords that don't match, make sure you're getting you're still getting that error. And then once you get the correct password, should work just like that. Okay, and so that is how you reset your password. Now you can redirect users here. I'd probably recommend it. Just they don't need to see the screen, so we can just kind of add that there. We can say plus redirecting. Okay, and that wraps it up for this tutorial. Thanks for watching.